Hey everyone, I'm back with more crazy Reddit stories for you. I've got a college education that turned into an expensive wake-up call, an international disaster that tested human kindness, and even a ride that crossed every boundary of professional behaviour. I do these every day, so subscribe if you want more in your feed. Well, grab something to drink and let's jump in. Our first story is about something I think a lot of people can relate to, but nobody really talks about honestly. I graduated 3 years ago with a degree in communications, and I'm still paying off loans that I'm starting to realise were for an education that didn't educate me in anything I couldn't have learned for free. But that's not even the part that makes me angry anymore. What makes me furious is how blatant the scam was, and how I was too young and trusting to see it happening right in front of my face. It started freshman year with Professor Davison's Introduction to Media Studies course. Required class, couldn't graduate without it. First day of class, he spent 20 minutes talking about his textbook. His textbook, not a textbook, not the standard one everyone uses. His personally authored, personally published, personally profited from textbook that cost $187 at the campus bookstore. I remember the exact price because I had to put it on a credit card I'd just gotten, and that number sat on my statement for months while I made minimum payments. The book was fine, I guess. It covered the basics. But here's the thing I realized later. Everything in that book was available online. Every single concept, every theory, every case study. He'd essentially compiled free information, slapped his name on it, and made it mandatory for 300 students per semester to purchase. Do the math on that. $187 times 300 students times 2 semesters. That's over $100,000 per year going directly into his pocket, just from one class. I didn't think much of it at the time. Textbooks are expensive, everyone knows that. It's just part of college, right? Sophomore year, I had Professor Davison again for media theory and practice. Different class, different textbook, also written by him. This one cost $212. I tried to find a used copy, but he'd released a new edition that semester. The new edition had 3 additional pages and a different cover. That's it, 3 pages. But the campus bookstore wouldn't buy back the old edition, and he announced on the first day that we absolutely needed the newest version because of critical updates. Those critical updates were a slightly expanded definition of social media that any of us could have written. Junior year, 2 more of his classes, 2 more of his textbooks. One cost $199, the other cost $224. I started paying attention to other professors too. Professor Chen, in the English department, assigned her own book for 2 classes. Professor Morrison, in sociology, assigned his. Professor Reeves in business assigned not 1 but 2 of her personally authored books, one of which was just a collection of her previously published articles that we could have accessed through the university library database for free. By senior year, I'd spent over $1,300 on professor-authored textbooks across maybe 8 different classes. $1,300 for books I rarely opened after the first few weeks. Books that contained information I could have found through basic internet research. Books that now sit in a box in my parents' garage because they have literally no resale value. But the textbook thing was just the most obvious symptom. The more I thought about my education, the more I realized how little of it actually prepared me for anything. My communications degree required 120 credit hours. Roughly half of those were general education requirements that had nothing to do with my major. I'm not saying learning is bad, but I'm saying charging me $50,000 to take courses I didn't need and didn't want is bad. The actual communications courses, most of them were taught by adjunct professors who were overworked and underpaid, who taught the same introductory material semester after semester because that's all the department would let them teach. The few courses taught by tenured professors like Davison were often just vehicles for them to sell their books and pad their speaking credentials. Award-winning professor Sounds great, until you realize the award was from an organization he founded. I had one professor who spent entire class periods showing us his documentary work and talking about his career. Interesting? Sure. Worth the $3,000 I paid for that 3-credit course? Absolutely not. I could have watched his documentaries online for free. Another professor assigned a group project that involved creating a social media campaign for a local business. Sounds practical, right? Except the professor then used our work, our ideas, our creative output in his consulting business. We found out when one of my classmates saw her exact campaign concept being presented by him at a professional conference. When she confronted him about it, he said student work was university property and therefore available for academic use. Academic use meaning he got paid $5,000 to present it. The Career Services Department was a joke. They offered resume workshops taught by people who hadn't worked outside academia in decades. Their advice was to use objective statements, which every actual hiring manager will tell you is outdated by at least 15 years. The job board was full of unpaid internships and commission-only sales positions. When I asked about networking opportunities, they handed me a photocopied list of alumni who'd volunteered to be contacted. Half the email addresses bounced back. I'm not saying I learned nothing. I met good people. I had a few professors who genuinely cared and taught me things that stuck. But the ratio of value to cost is so absurdly skewed that calling it anything other than a scam feels dishonest. Here's what really got me thinking about all this. After graduation, I couldn't find a job in my field. Spent 4 months applying to every communications position within a 2-hour radius. Most didn't even send rejection emails. The ones that did often said, I lacked practical experience. The practical experience they wanted, software proficiency and skills that weren't taught in any of my classes. Adobe Creative Suite, content management systems, analytics platforms, email marketing tools, all things I had to teach myself through YouTube tutorials and free online courses after graduating. I finally got a job as a social media coordinator for a small non-profit. Starting salary was $32,000. That's less than I owed in student loans. My monthly loan payment was $643. My monthly rent was $950. After taxes, my monthly take-home was about $2,100. You do that math. I was living in a studio apartment with second-hand furniture, eating rice and beans for dinner, and wondering what exactly my degree had gotten me except debt. A year into that job, they hired another social media person. She was 20 years old, no degree, but she'd been running successful Instagram accounts for local businesses since she was 16. She was better at the job than I was because she'd actually done it, not just studied theories about it. She got paid the same as me, same salary for someone with 4 fewer years of education and 0 student loan debt. That's when it really hit me. I'd spent 4 years and borrowed over $60,000 to get a degree that qualified me for a job that didn't require a degree. The degree was just a checkbox, a barrier to entry that existed only because everyone had collectively agreed it should exist. It didn't make me better at my job. It didn't teach me what I needed to know. It just put me in debt. I started looking into where my tuition money actually went. The university had built 2 new athletic facilities while I was there. $50 million for a football training centre, $30 million for a basketball arena renovation. Meanwhile, the communications department was in a building that hadn't been updated since the 70s, with broken air conditioning and computer labs running software from 2010. The president of the university made $800,000 a year. The athletic director made $600,000. The football coach made $1.2 million. Professor Davison, who was forcing students to buy his overpriced textbooks, made $120,000 plus whatever he got from book sales and consulting. The adjunct professors teaching most of my courses made about $3,000 per class with no benefits. They were working 2 or 3 jobs just to survive, and we were paying full tuition to be taught by people the university refused to pay fairly. The Student Recreation Center cost students a mandatory $250 fee per semester. I went exactly twice in 4 years. Couldn't afford the time because I was working 25 hours a week at a campus job that paid $8 an hour. That job, by the way, was in the admissions office, where I literally gave tours to prospective students and told them how great the university was. I fed the system that was actively exploiting me. I had friends who graduated with engineering degrees, nursing degrees, accounting degrees. They got jobs, good jobs, jobs that required their specific education and paid accordingly. Their degrees made sense. Mine didn't, but the university charged us the same tuition, same price for an education that led to a $60,000 starting salary, as for one that led to a $32,000 starting salary. How is that not fraud? The worst part is how many people defend this system. Older generations saying college is about the experience, about growing up, about becoming a well-rounded person. Great. That shouldn't cost $60,000. That shouldn't put young people in debt for decades. That shouldn't require purchasing textbooks that professors write and profit from. The experience of living away from home and figuring yourself out doesn't need to come with a price tag that rivals a mortgage. And before anyone says I should have gone to community college or a cheaper school, I did everything right according to conventional wisdom. I got scholarships. I worked part-time. I went to a public in-state university, not some private school. This was supposed to be the affordable option. If the affordable option leaves you in crushing debt for a degree that doesn't lead to a job that can pay off that debt, the system is broken. I'm $35,000 away from paying off my loans. It's been 3 years. I've paid over $23,000 and I still owe $35,000 because of interest. I've paid almost half of what I borrowed, and I'm barely halfway done. I'll be paying for this degree until I'm in my mid-30s. For what? For a piece of paper that got me a job I could have gotten without it, while the professors who taught me got rich selling overpriced books filled with information that was freely available. I think about Professor Davison sometimes. I looked him up recently. He's still there, still teaching the same classes, still assigning his own textbooks. He's released new editions of all of them since I graduated. Students are still paying hundreds of dollars per book. He's still making 6 figures from the university, plus whatever he makes from book sales. And students are still showing up to his class, excited to learn, not realizing they're funding his retirement while taking on debt that will follow them for decades. The system is designed this way. It's not an accident. It's not an unfortunate side effect. It's the point. Universities are businesses that found a captive market in young people who've been told their entire lives that college is necessary for success. They can charge whatever they want because student loans are easy to get and impossible to discharge. They can require expensive textbooks because students have no choice. They can underpay adjuncts and overpay administrators because there's no accountability. They can build fancy facilities and pay coaches millions while cutting academic programs because athletics bring in money and prestige. And we all just accept it. We accept that education costs more than a house down payment. We accept that professors can profit from mandatory textbook purchases. We accept that universities spend more on football stadiums than academic resources. We accept that students graduate with debt that impacts every major life decision for decades. We accept that the value proposition makes no sense, that the cost far exceeds the benefit for most majors, that the system is fundamentally exploitative. I don't know what the solution is, but I know that what I experienced wasn't education, it was extraction. They extracted money from me and my family and the federal government, and in return, they gave me a degree that hasn't opened doors, hasn't provided financial security, and hasn't justified its cost. They got rich, I got debt. That's not education, that's a scam. That's the end of that story. I'm still angry about it, obviously. Still making those monthly payments. Still wondering what my life would look like if I'd taken that $60,000 and invested it in literally anything else. But at least I can see it clearly now. At least I'm not still pretending it made sense. This next one happened last summer, and I'm still kind of shocked at how it all went down. I'd been planning my trip to Paris for 2 years. Saved up, learned some basic French phrases, made elaborate spreadsheets of museums and cafes and neighbourhoods to explore. I'm kind of a planner by nature, so I had everything organised down to daily itineraries and backup plans. What I didn't plan for was having my fanny pack sliced off my body on the metro during rush hour on my second day there. The fanny pack had everything: passport, credit cards, debit card, about €300 in cash, my phone, my hotel key card, everything. I didn't even realise it was gone until I got off at my stop and reached down to check the time on my phone. The whole pack was just missing, strap cut clean through. Must have happened when the train was packed. People pressed against each other. I felt nothing. The panic was immediate and overwhelming. I was standing on the platform at Saint-Michel, people flowing around me, and I couldn't move, couldn't think. Just kept touching my waist where the pack had been, like maybe I was wrong and it would magically reappear. It didn't. An older woman noticed me standing there, clearly distressed. She said something in French that I didn't understand. I just kept saying, "Passport, passport," like that word would fix everything. She touched my arm gently and said, "English?" I nodded. Her English wasn't great, but it was better than my French. "Your bag?" she asked. I explained as simply as I could. "Stolen, cut off, everything gone." She guided me to a bench and told me to sit. Then she pulled out her phone and started making calls. I couldn't understand most of what she was saying, but I caught a few words. Police, American, embassy. She was taking charge of my crisis like it was her own. After a few minutes, she handed me her phone. The person on the other end spoke English. He explained that he was her son-in-law, that he worked at a hotel and dealt with tourists frequently. He told me where the nearest police station was, that I needed to file a report for insurance purposes and to get a document for the embassy. He said his mother-in-law would walk me there because it was complicated to explain. Then he said, and I'll never forget this, "Don't worry, Paris takes care of visitors. We fix this." The woman, whose name I learned was Marguerite, walked me 6 blocks to the police station. She didn't speak much, just kept her hand on my elbow like she was afraid I'd bolt. At the station, the officers didn't speak English. Marguerite explained everything to them while I stood there feeling useless and overwhelmed. They gave me forms to fill out. She helped me with those too, translating each question, making sure I understood what they were asking. The process took almost 2 hours. While we waited, Marguerite bought me a coffee from a vending machine and a sandwich from a shop next door. She paid for both, waving away my attempts to explain that I had no money to pay her back. "Later," she said. "You fix later." After the police report was filed, she called her son-in-law again. He'd been busy on my behalf. He'd contacted the American embassy, gotten me an emergency appointment for the next day. He'd called the hotel I was staying at to explain the situation, and they'd agreed to let me stay in my room without the key card once I verified my identity through my reservation confirmation. He'd even looked up the international contact numbers for my credit card companies so I could report the cards stolen. But here's the problem. I had no way to make those calls. My phone was gone, and I had no money for a payphone, even if I could find one. Marguerite solved this by taking me to her apartment, which was a 15-minute walk from the police station. Her husband, Claude, was there. He didn't speak any English at all, but he understood the situation immediately. He set me up at their kitchen table with a phone, a notepad, and a cup of tea. I spent the next hour and a half on the phone with banks and credit card companies, going through security questions, cancelling cards, requesting emergency replacements. Marguerite and Claude sat in their living room, speaking quietly to each other, giving me privacy but staying close enough to help if needed. At one point, Claude brought me cookies, just put the plate down next to me and patted my shoulder. When I finally finished all the calls, exhausted and emotionally drained, Marguerite made dinner. I tried to refuse, said I'd already imposed too much, but she wouldn't hear it. She said something to Claude, and he laughed and nodded. Later, through the son-in-law translating on the phone, I learned she'd said, "The girl is hungry and has no money. What is she going to do? Starve?" Dinner was simple. Roasted chicken, potatoes, green beans. We ate mostly in silence because of the language barrier, but it was comfortable. They asked me basic questions through gestures, and the few words we all knew. How old? 28. Family? Yes, parents and a sister. First time Paris? Yes. They nodded and smiled, and Claude kept refilling my water glass. After dinner, Marguerite's son-in-law called back. He'd been working more miracles. He'd contacted a church organisation that helped travellers in emergencies, and they'd agreed to give me a small loan to cover food and transportation until I could get to the embassy and arrange for money to be wired. He'd also confirmed my embassy appointment and mapped out the route for me. He'd written everything down in English and would email it, but since I had no phone or computer access, Marguerite would print it for me before I left. The stress of the day, the kindness of strangers, the overwhelming feeling of being taken care of when I felt so vulnerable and alone, it all hit at once. I sat there for a moment, collecting myself, trying to find the right words to thank them. Marguerite seemed to understand. She came around the table and squeezed my shoulder reassuringly. Claude quietly took the dishes to the kitchen. They insisted I stay in their spare room that night. It was late. I was in an unfamiliar city with no money and no phone, and the hotel was across town. The spare room was clearly used for storage, but there was a daybed made up with clean sheets. Marguerite gave me a toothbrush, still in its package, and some pyjamas that she said belonged to her daughter, who lived in Lyon now. They fit well enough. I barely slept, kept replaying the day, feeling the ghost sensation of the fanny pack on my waist, imagining worst-case scenarios. But I also kept thinking about how Marguerite had just stepped in, no hesitation, and decided my problem was now her problem to solve. How she'd spent her entire day helping a complete stranger. How Claude had welcomed me into their home without even speaking my language. The next morning, Marguerite made breakfast. Bread, butter, jam, coffee. She'd printed out the information from her son-in-law and put it in a folder for me. She also gave me 20 euros from her purse. When I protested, she held up her hand and said very firmly, "No, you need." Claude drew me a map of how to get to the church organisation from their apartment, with little landmarks illustrated because he knew I couldn't read the street signs easily. They walked me to the metro station. Marguerite made sure I understood which line to take, which stop to get off at, which exit to use. She hugged me goodbye and said something in French that I didn't understand. Claude shook my hand very formally. Then they waited on the platform until my train came, waving as it pulled away. The church organisation was exactly where the son-in-law said it would be. They gave me 200 euros as a short-term loan to be repaid to a similar organisation in the United States once I got home. They also let me use their phone to call my parents, who arranged to wire money to a location near the embassy. The woman who helped me said they did this frequently, that tourists were common targets for pickpockets and thieves, that I shouldn't feel bad or stupid. "It happens to locals too," she said. "Just bad luck." The embassy appointment went smoothly. They issued me an emergency passport that was good for a limited time. With the wired money from my parents, I was able to buy a cheap phone, get back to my hotel, and start putting my trip back together. I had 5 days left in Paris. I could have gone home early, cut my losses, but something about the whole experience made me want to stay, to not let the theft ruin what I'd planned for so long. I spent the next day trying to find Marguerite and Claude. I had their address, which I'd carefully written down before leaving their apartment. I bought flowers and wine and a thank you card. When I got to their building, the man at the door spoke a little English. He called up to their apartment. Claude came down. When he saw me with the flowers and wine, he laughed and shook his head. He called up the stairs, and Marguerite came down too. Through gestures and broken translations, I tried to thank them, tried to express what their help had meant. Marguerite just kept saying, "It's normal," like helping a stranded foreigner was just what anyone would do. I wanted to give them money, to repay them for the food and the loan and the help, but they absolutely refused. Claude pushed my hand away whenever I tried to offer cash. Finally, Marguerite took the flowers and wine, but only because I looked so desperate to give them something. Before I left, Marguerite gave me her son-in-law's email address. She said through gestures that I should write to him when I got home, to let them know I was safe. I promised I would. Claude drew me another little map, this one showing the route to a location which he indicated I should visit. He drew the basilica with impressive detail for someone who wasn't an artist, and pointed up as if to say the view was worth it. I did visit there. The view was worth it. I also visited everything else on my original itinerary. I ate at cafes, explored museums, walked through neighborhoods. Every day, I thought about Marguerite and Claude. Every time someone gave me directions or helped me figure out the metro or patiently tried to understand my terrible French, I thought about how wrong I'd been about cities being cold and impersonal. When I got home, I wrote to the son-in-law. He responded within a day, saying his in-laws were happy to hear from me and glad I'd finished my trip. He said Marguerite had told everyone at her church about the American girl who got robbed and how they'd helped. He said it made her feel good to be useful, that since she'd retired, she sometimes felt like she didn't have purpose. Helping me had given her stories to tell and a sense of being needed. That broke my heart a little. She'd saved my trip, probably saved me from having a complete breakdown in a foreign country, and she felt like I'd done her a favor by letting her help. I sent them a care package a few weeks later. American snacks, a picture book of my hometown, a long letter that I'd had professionally translated into French. I included repayment for the money they'd spent on me, even though I knew they wouldn't want it. The son-in-law emailed to confirm they'd received it. He said Marguerite was deeply moved when she read the letter. He said Claude put the picture book on their coffee table and showed it to everyone who visited. That's the end of that story. I think about them whenever I travel now. Whenever I see someone who looks lost or confused, I try to do what Marguerite did. Just step in, assume they need help, offer it without being asked. It's the kind of kindness that changes how you see the world, or at least it changed how I see it. Our next story actually just happened a few weeks ago, and I'm still kind of processing it. I don't use rideshare apps often because I have a car, but it was late, I'd been out with friends, and I'd had a couple of grown-up beverages. Not drunk, but definitely over the legal limit to drive, so I did the responsible thing and called for a ride. The driver's name was Amari, 5-star rating. Been driving for 3 years according to his profile. Seemed safe enough. He pulled up in a clean sedan, confirmed my name, and I got in the back seat. Normal start to what I expected to be a normal 20-minute ride home. The first few minutes were fine. He asked how my night was. I said it was good, and we had that standard small talk drivers and passengers do. Weather, traffic, weekend plans. Then he started asking more personal questions. Did I live alone? Was I seeing anyone? What did I do for work? I kept my answers vague because, while I believe in being friendly, I also believe in boundaries. Yes, no, office work. The kind of responses that don't invite follow-up questions. He didn't take the hint, started telling me about his own life. Recently divorced, 2 kids he only saw on weekends, feeling pretty lonely these days. He was watching me in the rearview mirror more than watching the road, making eye contact in a way that felt deliberate and uncomfortable. I pulled out my phone, pretending to text someone. Universal signal for, "I'm done talking." He took it differently. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I'm not some creep. Just making conversation." The thing about situations like this is that your brain starts doing calculations. Is he actually being inappropriate, or am I overreacting? If I say something, will it make things worse? How far are we from my destination? Can I ask him to pull over without seeming rude? And underneath all of that, women are taught to be polite even when we're uncomfortable, to manage men's feelings, to not cause scenes. I said something non-committal like, "Oh, I know, just need to respond to this." Kept my eyes on my phone. We were still 12 minutes from my place according to the app. 12 minutes felt very long suddenly. He kept talking. Said I seemed like a nice person. Said he could tell I was smart, independent, probably didn't need anyone. But everyone needs someone, right? He said. Everyone gets lonely. I made a noise that could have been agreement or acknowledgement, didn't look up from my phone. My heart was beating faster. Nothing he was saying was overtly threatening. He wasn't yelling or making explicit comments, but the vibe was so wrong. The way he kept trying to catch my eye in the mirror, the way he'd slowed down, like he was trying to extend the trip, the way his voice had gotten softer, more intimate. "You know," he said, "I don't usually do this, but you seem special. What are you doing after I drop you off? Maybe we could grab coffee or something. I know a place that's open late." There it was, the actual ask. The moment where I had to decide how to respond. I thought about saying I had a boyfriend, thought about lying and saying I was meeting someone, thought about being direct and saying I wasn't interested. All of those options felt risky in different ways. Instead, I said, "That's really nice of you to offer, but I'm pretty tired, just want to get home and sleep." "Come on," he said, "just coffee, 30 minutes. What's the harm?" The fact that he pushed back made my stomach drop. The fact that he said, "What's the harm?" made me realize he knew exactly what he was doing. He was testing boundaries, seeing how much he could push, counting on me being too polite to firmly refuse. I looked at the app. 9 minutes away. I could rate him badly after the trip, report him to the company. But right now, I was in his car, he knew where I lived, and I needed to get out safely. "I really can't," I said, trying to sound regretful rather than firm. "Early morning tomorrow, already committed to something." "That's too bad," he said. The change in his tone was immediate, colder, less friendly. Most people appreciate when someone's trying to be nice, but I guess you're not most people. The passive-aggressive guilt trip made me angry. Not scared, angry. He was actually trying to make me feel bad for not wanting to have coffee with a stranger who was supposed to be providing a professional service. The entitlement was breathtaking. I didn't respond, just watched the app, watching the little car icon get closer to my destination. 7 minutes, 6 minutes. He'd stopped talking, and the silence felt hostile. He was driving faster now, taking turns more sharply than necessary, punishing me with his driving. When we were about 3 blocks from my building, I made a decision. I told him to drop me at a corner that wasn't actually where I lived. A busy intersection with a 24-hour convenience store, well lit and public. He pulled up without saying anything. I got out quickly, closed the door, and stood under the streetlight until he drove away. Then I walked the 3 blocks home, constantly checking over my shoulder to make sure he hadn't circled back. When I got inside my building, I locked the door behind me and stood in the hallway for a few minutes, just breathing. I reported him through the app immediately, selected every relevant category, made me uncomfortable, asked for personal information, requested to meet outside the app, unprofessional behavior. I wrote a detailed account of the conversation and the way he'd driven after I refused. I gave him 1 star. The response from Uber came the next morning. Not a generic automated message, but what appeared to be an actual person from their safety team. They thanked me for reporting, confirmed they took the matter seriously, and said they were immediately investigating. They asked if I'd be willing to provide additional details in a follow-up call. which I agreed to. That afternoon, I spoke with someone named Jennifer from their specialized safety unit. She asked specific questions about the timeline, the nature of his comments, how his driving changed after I refused. She didn't make me feel like I was overreacting or being dramatic. She said clearly that what I described was a violation of their community guidelines and driver code of conduct. 3 days later, I got another email. Jennifer, again. She told me they'd completed their investigation, which included reviewing the trip data, GPS records showing the extended route and erratic driving, and checking for similar reports from other passengers. She couldn't share all the details due to privacy policies, but she confirmed that Amari had been permanently deactivated from the platform. He would not be driving for Uber again. She also told me that 2 other passengers had reported similar behavior from him in the past 6 months, but the reports hadn't been flagged as a pattern until mine came through with the level of detail I'd provided. The company was reviewing their systems for identifying repeat offenders more quickly. She apologized that he'd been able to continue driving after previous complaints. I was surprised. I'd expected the usual corporate brush-off, the "we take this seriously" message that means nothing. Instead, they'd actually done something. They'd actually removed him from the platform. Jennifer sent me a credit for the ride and several additional trip credits as an apology. More than that, she sent me information about Uber's safety features I hadn't known, about the ability to share trip details in real time, the emergency button that connects directly to 911, the option to request that the driver not speak to you. She also mentioned they were piloting a program where passengers could report concerning behavior during a ride, not just after, which would alert their safety team immediately. I checked his profile a few weeks later, just to confirm. It was gone, completely deactivated. Not just inactive, but removed from the system. The thing that surprised me most was how validating it felt to be taken seriously. To have someone actually listen to what happened and recognize it as inappropriate. To not have to justify or explain why it made me uncomfortable. To know that action was actually taken, not just promised. I told my friends about it, the women I'd talked to before, who all had their own stories of uncomfortable drivers. They were shocked. Most of them had gotten the generic responses, the meaningless platitudes. One friend said she'd reported a driver 3 times for different incidents and never heard back beyond the automated "thank you for your feedback" message. It made me realize how low the bar is, how unusual it is for a company to actually follow through, how rare it is to feel protected rather than dismissed. I still take precautions, I still sit in the back seat, still share my trip details with friends, still stay alert to any red flags. But I don't feel as helpless as I did before. I know that if something happens, there's at least a chance it will be taken seriously, that reporting actually means something, that there are consequences for drivers who cross boundaries. And I hope Uber keeps improving their systems. I hope they keep identifying patterns faster, responding more quickly, making it easier for passengers to report concerning behavior in real time. I hope other companies follow their lead instead of treating safety reports as a PR problem to manage. I still think about that night sometimes, about how scared I felt, how trapped, how angry. But now I also think about what happened after, about being believed, about action being taken, about one person not being able to do that to other passengers. It doesn't erase what happened, but it helps. It makes me feel like maybe the system can work if companies actually try. That's something, at least. That's more than I expected. Our next one is genuinely one of the strangest experiences of my life, and I still don't know what to make of it. I moved into my apartment about 8 months ago. Small building, 6 units total, pretty quiet neighborhood. My place is on the 2nd floor, and the unit next to mine is occupied by a guy named Dennis. When I moved in, he seemed normal enough. Mid-40s, lived alone, worked from home doing something with computers. We'd nod when we passed each other in the hallway, that kind of thing. The first weird thing happened about a month after I moved in. I was coming home from work around 6 in the evening, and Dennis was standing in the hallway outside his door, just standing there. Not getting mail, not waiting for someone, just standing, facing his door but not moving. I said hello. He didn't respond, didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge me at all. I went into my apartment feeling slightly unsettled, but figured maybe he hadn't heard me or was deep in thought about something. Then it started happening more frequently. I'd see him standing in the hallway at odd times, early morning when I left for work, late at night when I got home from the gym. Always in the exact same spot, facing his door, never moving. It went from odd to concerning pretty quickly. Around month 2, I started hearing noises through the wall. Our apartments share a wall, and the insulation in this old building is terrible, so some noise bleed is normal. But these weren't normal sounds. It was talking, constant talking, but I could never make out words, just the rhythm of speech going on for hours. At first I thought he was on phone calls, but it never stopped. 3 in the morning, talking. 6 in the morning, talking. It was like he never slept. I tried to ignore it, bought earplugs, started running a white noise machine, told myself it wasn't my business what my neighbour did in his own apartment. But the hallway thing kept escalating. I'd find him standing there at 2 in the morning, at 4, at 5:30. I started feeling uncomfortable in my own building, timing my comings and goings to avoid him. Then I started finding notes. The first one was slid under my door, plain white paper, handwritten in tiny, cramped script that was difficult to read. It said something about frequencies and signals and needing to stay vigilant. It didn't address me by name, didn't have any signature, just this rambling paragraph about electromagnetic interference and someone watching. I thought it was weird, but not necessarily threatening. Maybe he'd slid it under the wrong door. I threw it away. But then there was another one, and another. They came every few days, always the same tiny handwriting, always the same themes. Someone was watching. Signals were being transmitted. He needed to document everything. The walls weren't safe. I started keeping them instead of throwing them away. I don't know why exactly. Something about the content made me feel like I should have a record, just in case. I had about 7 notes when I decided I should probably talk to someone about this. The building manager seemed like the logical choice. His name was Ron, an older guy who'd managed the building for 15 years. I showed him the notes and explained about Dennis standing in the hallway and the constant talking. Ron's face did this thing where he clearly knew something but didn't want to say. Finally, he told me that Dennis had lived in the building for 6 years, used to be completely normal. Had a good job, friends who visited, seemed stable. Then about 2 years ago, something changed. He became withdrawn, paranoid, stopped leaving his apartment except to get mail or occasionally stand in the hallway. Ron said other neighbours had complained. They'd heard the talking, found similar notes. The woman who lived in my apartment before me had moved out specifically because Dennis made her uncomfortable. Ron had tried to talk to Dennis about it, but Dennis insisted nothing was wrong, that he was fine, that everyone else was overreacting. Unless Dennis did something overtly dangerous or violated his lease, Ron couldn't evict him. All he could do was keep documenting the complaints and hope Dennis either got help or did something actionable. That conversation made me feel worse, not better, because now I knew this wasn't temporary. This was Dennis's new normal, and I was living next to someone who was clearly experiencing some kind of mental health crisis with no intervention happening. The notes continued. They got longer, more detailed, harder to read. The handwriting became more erratic. He started numbering them, like they were part of a series. Number 12 talked about cameras hidden in the ceiling tiles. Number 15 talked about people following him to the grocery store. Number 19 talked about his food being tampered with. Each note was dated and timed, down to the minute. I stopped reading them carefully, just collected them and put them in a folder. But I couldn't stop hearing the talking through the wall. It was constant, relentless. Sometimes it sounded angry, sometimes pleading, sometimes matter of fact, always one-sided, like he was having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. Month 4. Things got worse. I woke up one night to pounding on the wall we shared. Not rhythmic, not like he was hanging something. Just frantic, desperate pounding. Boom, 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 over and over. I called Ron. He said he'd come over in the morning, that he couldn't do much at 2 in the morning unless I felt immediately threatened. The pounding went on for 40 minutes, then stopped abruptly. The talking resumed. I didn't sleep at all that night, just lay in bed, listening to the muffled sound of Dennis talking to no one, wondering what was happening on the other side of that wall. Ron came by the next morning. He knocked on Dennis's door. No answer. He knocked again, called out Dennis's name. Still nothing. But we could both hear the talking inside. Ron used his master key and opened the door. I stayed in the hallway, but I could see into the apartment from where I was standing. It was chaos. Papers everywhere, covering every surface. The walls were covered in writing, diagrams, strings connecting different points like a conspiracy theory board. The talking was coming from Dennis, who was sitting on the floor in the middle of the room, speaking rapidly to no one. Ron tried to talk to him. Dennis didn't acknowledge him at all, just kept talking, going on about codes and patterns and systems of control. His eyes were unfocused, looking at something that wasn't there. Ron called for a wellness check. The police came, then paramedics. They eventually convinced Dennis to go with them to the hospital for evaluation. The apartment was cleared out by family members I'd never seen before. A sister and her husband, both looking exhausted and sad. I talked to them briefly in the hallway. They said Dennis had been diagnosed with schizophrenia in his 20s, had been stable on medication for years. Then he'd convinced himself the medication was part of the surveillance, stopped taking it, spiraled. They'd tried to help, but he refused all contact, blocked their numbers, wouldn't answer the door. They didn't know how bad it had gotten until the hospital called. They cleaned out his apartment over the course of a week. Bags and bags of papers, all covered in that cramped handwriting. They found hundreds of notes, like the ones he'd been sliding under my door. Found journals filled with documentation of perceived threats. Found evidence that he'd stopped eating regularly, stopped bathing, stopped doing anything except filling pages with his fears. The sister apologized to me when they were finished. Said she was sorry I'd been subjected to that she wished she'd been able to intervene sooner. I told her it wasn't her fault. What else could I say? She looked like she'd been carrying guilt for years already. Dennis didn't come back to the apartment. The sister said he was in a facility getting treatment, that he'd be there for a while, possibly permanently, depending on how he responded. She put his stuff in storage and broke his lease. A new tenant moved in about 6 weeks after Dennis left. A young couple, friendly and normal. The wall is quiet now, but I still think about Dennis sometimes. Wonder what he's like now, if the medication is helping, if he's still convinced people are watching him. I think about how he lived next to me for months while his reality was falling apart and all I could do was collect his notes and complain about the noise. I think about how there's no system for catching people when they fall like that. How his family tried, but couldn't force him to get help until he'd deteriorated so badly that a forced hospital admission was the only option. I still have the folder of notes. I don't know why I kept them. They're disturbing to read, nonsensical and paranoid and sad. But they're also documentation of a person losing their grip on reality in real time, and throwing them away felt wrong somehow, like erasing evidence that this happened, that he suffered, that the system failed him. The new neighbours are great, quiet, respectful, normal, but sometimes, late at night, I still hear Phantom talking through the wall, just for a second before I realise it's silent. My brain expecting the sound that was constant for months. It's unsettling how quickly you can adapt to something being wrong, how abnormal becomes normal when you're exposed to it long enough. That's the end of that story. I hope Dennis is okay, wherever he is. I hope he's getting the help he needs. But I also know that mental health care in this country is inadequate at best, and people like Dennis fall through the cracks constantly. It's a tragedy that plays out in quiet apartments and hallways, invisible until it reaches a crisis point. And even then, the intervention is temporary, the support is minimal, and the chance of it happening again is high. Our next story is probably the hardest one I've ever had to tell. His name was Mr. Biscuits. Stupid name for a cat, I know, but I was 22 when I adopted him and thought I was hilarious. He was this scraggly orange tabby at the shelter, missing part of his ear, skinny and skittish. The volunteer said he'd been there for 4 months, that adult cats with imperfections don't get adopted easily. Something about him just grabbed me. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, like he was resigned to being overlooked but hoping anyway. I took him home that day. He hid under my bed for 3 days straight, only coming out to eat and use the litter box when he thought I was asleep. On day 4, he ventured into the living room and sat about 6 feet away from me, watching. On day 5, he got a little closer. By week 2, he was sleeping on my chest at night, purring so loud it vibrated through my ribcage. We had 6 years together. 6 years of him greeting me at the door when I got home, of him sitting on my laptop when I tried to work, of him sleeping in the crook of my arm every single night. He was my constant companion through a bad breakup, through job changes, through moving apartments twice. He was there for all of it, this steady presence that never judged, never left, never stopped being exactly who he was. The first sign something was wrong came on a random Tuesday. I'd just gotten home from work, and Biscuits didn't meet me at the door. I found him in the bedroom, curled up in a spot he never usually slept. When I called him, he didn't come. When I picked him up, he felt thinner than usual, lighter. I made a vet appointment for the next day. The vet did an exam, felt his abdomen, and her expression changed. She said she wanted to run some tests, that she felt something that concerned her. The tests came back 2 days later. Lymphoma. Advanced. The vet said we'd probably caught it too late, that the survival rates for feline lymphoma weren't great even with aggressive treatment. She gave me options. We could try chemotherapy, which might give him a few more months, but would make him feel terrible and cost thousands of dollars. We could do palliative care, keep him comfortable for however long he had left, or we could euthanize now, spare him the decline. She said all of this very gently, very professionally, while I sat in the exam room holding my cat and trying not to cry in front of a stranger. I chose chemotherapy. I know some people will judge that, say I was being selfish, prolonging his suffering for my benefit. Maybe they're right. But I couldn't just give up. I couldn't choose to end his life when he was still purring in my lap, still eating his food, still seeming like himself except for being a bit thin. The treatment started the following week. It was a pill I had to give him every day, plus IV chemotherapy every 3 weeks at the vet's office. Each IV session cost $800. The pills were another $150 per month. I had pet insurance, but they only covered 50% after the deductible. I was looking at thousands of dollars in treatment costs, maybe tens of thousands depending on how long we kept going. I paid it, maxed out a credit card, borrowed money from my parents, picked up freelance work on weekends, whatever it took. Because Biscuits was more than a pet to me. He was my family. He was the thing I came home to. He was the reason I got up in the morning some days. I would have sold everything I owned to give him more time. The first month of treatment went okay. He was tired, slept more than usual, but he still ate and still purred when I pet him. The vet said his blood work showed the lymphoma responding to treatment. I let myself hope, thought maybe we'd be one of the success stories, maybe we'd beat the odds. Month 2, he started declining. Lost more weight despite me trying every food I could find to tempt him. Started hiding more, withdrawing. The vet adjusted his medications, said this was normal, that we might need to try a different chemotherapy protocol. Another $2,000 for a different set of treatments. I was working 12-hour days and then coming home to force-feed my cat, to give him pills he fought against, to clean up when he got sick from the medication. I wasn't sleeping well. I wasn't eating well. I was spending every spare moment researching feline lymphoma, joining online support groups, looking for miracle cures that didn't exist. My friends told me I needed to consider quality of life, that maybe I was holding on too tight, that maybe the kindest thing would be to let him go. I got angry when they said that. Told them they didn't understand, that they'd never had a connection like this with an animal. Looking back, I was probably being defensive because part of me knew they were right. Month 3. Biscuits stopped eating entirely. I had to take him to the emergency vet twice for fluids because he was getting dehydrated. Each emergency visit was $1,000. The vet said his kidneys were starting to fail, a side effect of the chemotherapy. She said we could do dialysis, but it was expensive and not guaranteed to help, or we could stop treatment, let him go. I chose dialysis, another $3,000. He hated it, fought the entire time they were hooking him up to the machine, came home exhausted and scared. I held him that night and cried into his fur, telling him I was sorry, that I was trying to help, that I just needed him to hold on a little longer. The next morning, I woke up and he was lying on my chest like he always did, but something was wrong. His breathing was laboured, rasping. His eyes looked glazed. I rushed him to the emergency vet. They said his lungs were filling with fluid, that the cancer had spread, that there was nothing more they could do. I had a choice to make. I could authorize them to drain the fluid, which might buy him another day or two, but would be painful and traumatic. Or I could stay with him while they put him to sleep. Let him go peacefully while I held him. End his suffering. I chose the second option. Finally, after months of fighting, I chose to let him go. The vet brought me into a quiet room. I sat on the floor with biscuits in my lap. He was struggling to breathe, clearly in distress. The vet explained what would happen, that it would be peaceful, that I could take all the time I needed. I told Biscuits I loved him, told him he was a good cat, told him thank you for 6 years of being my best friend. The vet gave him the injection. He went limp in my arms within seconds. The struggling stopped. The pain stopped. He was gone. I sat there, holding his body for maybe 20 minutes. The vet left me alone, said there was no rush. When I finally felt ready, I let them take him. Walked out to my car in a daze. Drove home to an apartment that felt empty and wrong. His bowls were still on the floor. His toys were scattered around. His bed was by the window. Everything was there except him. The total cost of his treatment was just over $18,000. $18,000 for 3 months of declining health, 3 months of medications and procedures and emergency visits. $18,000 that didn't save him, just delayed the inevitable while making him miserable. I've spent a lot of time thinking about whether I made the right choice, whether I should have let him go sooner, spared him the chemotherapy and the decline, whether I put him through all that for me, not for him, whether I was giving him more time or just making him suffer longer. I don't have an answer. I wanted to save him. I wanted medical science to work. I wanted him to be the exception, the cat who beat cancer and lived another 10 years. I wanted more time with my best friend. But what I wanted doesn't matter. What matters is what he experienced, and I'll never know if I made that better or worse. The thing nobody tells you about losing a pet is how it disrupts your entire routine. I'd had the same schedule for 6 years. Wake up, feed Biscuits, get ready for work, say goodbye to Biscuits, come home, feed Biscuits, spend the evening with Biscuits, go to bed with Biscuits. My entire life was built around this small orange cat. And then he was gone, and I didn't know what to do with myself. I'd come home and expect to see him at the door. I'd wake up in the night reaching for him. I'd buy his favourite treats at the store before remembering he wasn't there to eat them. The grief was physical, this hollow ache in my chest that wouldn't go away. I cried more in the weeks after he died than I'd cried in years. People who aren't pet people don't understand. They'd say things like, "It was just a cat," or "You can get another one," like he was replaceable. Like 6 years of companionship and love, meant nothing just because he was an animal. Those comments hurt almost as much as losing him. It's been 4 months now. The acute grief has faded into something more manageable, this dull sadness that surfaces at random moments when I see an orange cat on the street, when I find one of his toys under the couch, when I wake up in the night and remember why the bed feels too big. I've been thinking about adopting again, going back to that same shelter, finding another unwanted cat, giving them a home. Part of me feels like I'm being disloyal to Biscuits. Like getting another cat means he was replaceable, after all. But another part of me knows that's not true. No cat will ever replace him. No cat could. But maybe a new cat could help fill the space he left. Could give me something to care for again. Could give another animal the chance Biscuits gave me 6 years ago. The shelter website has photos of all their available cats. I look at them sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep. There's this black cat who's been there for 8 months, old and skinny and missing teeth. Nobody wants an old cat. Nobody wants a cat with medical issues. But that cat deserves love too. Deserves someone to choose them. I haven't gone to meet him yet. Not sure I'm ready. But I think about it. Think about showing up at the shelter and bringing home this unwanted old cat and giving him whatever time he has left. Think about Biscuits and how he was unwanted too. How he spent 4 months in a cage before I picked him. Think about how he gave me 6 years of unconditional love that I'll never regret, even though losing him broke my heart. Maybe that's the lesson. Love doesn't have to last forever to be worth it. 6 years is nothing compared to a human lifespan, but it was everything to me. And if I only get 3 years with the next cat, or 1 year, or 6 months, maybe that's still worth it. Maybe giving an animal a good home for whatever time they have left is worth the grief that comes after. I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. Still processing. Still missing my stupid orange cat with the torn ear and the loud purr. Still wishing I'd spent more time just being with him instead of constantly trying to fix him. Still hoping I made the right choices, even though I'll never know for sure. That's the end of that story. If you have pets, go hug them. Take an extra minute to just sit with them. They're not here forever, and neither are we. Make the time count. Our next story is about something that still makes my blood pressure spike when I think about it, even 3 years later. I was 21 years old, a junior at State University, living in an off-campus apartment with 2 roommates. It was February, one of those brutally cold Midwest nights where the wind cuts through your jacket like it's made of tissue paper. I had been feeling off all day, kind of dizzy and nauseous, but I chalked it up to the terrible cafeteria food I'd eaten for lunch. By 8 p.m. though, I was in serious trouble. The room started spinning. I couldn't stand up without feeling like I was going to pass out, and my roommate Jake found me on the bathroom floor. He called 911 immediately. I remember trying to tell him not to, that I'd be fine, that I just needed to sleep it off. But he ignored me, thank God, because apparently I looked terrible. The paramedics arrived maybe 10 minutes later. They did their checks, asked me questions I could barely answer, and said they were taking me to the hospital. That's when I managed to pull out my insurance card. I had student health insurance through the university. It was bare bones coverage, but it was something. More importantly, I knew exactly which hospitals were in network because the insurance company had sent me a list at the beginning of the year. There were 3 hospitals in our city. 2 were in network. 1, the fancy private hospital on the north side, was out of network. I told the paramedics, as clearly as I could manage, that they needed to take me to County General or Mercy Hospital. Both were closer anyway. Both were in network. I even showed them my insurance card, pointed to the information on the back. The paramedic, a guy probably in his 40s with a mustache, just nodded and said they'd take care of it. They loaded me into the ambulance. I was drifting in and out at that point, but I remember the sirens, the lights, the way the stretcher rattled over every bump in the road. When we arrived and they wheeled me in, I saw the sign. St. Michael's Medical Center, the out-of-network hospital, the expensive one. I tried to protest. I really did. I said something like, "This isn't right. I told you not to bring me here." But the paramedic just patted my shoulder and said something about how this was the closest hospital with the appropriate facilities for my condition, which was complete nonsense. County General had a full emergency department and was actually 4 blocks closer to my apartment. They admitted me, ran tests. Turned out I had a nasty inner ear infection that had thrown off my equilibrium, combined with severe dehydration. Nothing life-threatening. They gave me IV fluids, some medication, kept me overnight for observation, and discharged me the next afternoon. Total time in the hospital, about 18 hours. I felt better. The dizziness was gone. I went home thinking the worst was over. Then the bills started arriving. The first one came 2 weeks later. $4,300 from the hospital. My insurance had paid exactly $0 of it because Street Michaels was out of network. My plan had no out-of-network coverage except in cases of true emergencies where no in-network facility was available. Their determination, my condition didn't qualify, and in-network facilities were available. I called the insurance company. The representative was sympathetic but firm. They couldn't pay because I'd gone to an out-of-network facility. I explained that the paramedics had taken me there against my explicit instructions. She said, I needed to take that up with the ambulance company. I called the ambulance company. They were part of the city's emergency services. The person I spoke to said their paramedics used their professional judgment to determine the most appropriate facility. I said I had specifically requested an in-network hospital. He said he'd look into it and call me back. He never did. Then the second bill arrived. The ambulance company, $950. Insurance paid $200 of it. My responsibility? $750. Then a third bill. The emergency room physician, who apparently billed separately from the hospital, $1,200. Insurance paid nothing. I was sitting on over $6,000 in medical debt for an inner ear infection. I was a college student working part-time at a campus bookstore, making $9 an hour. I had maybe $400 in my checking account. I tried everything. I called the hospital's billing department and asked about financial assistance. They said I made too much money. $9 an hour, 15 hours a week, and I made too much money. I called the insurance company again. They said their position hadn't changed. I filed a formal complaint with the state insurance commissioner. That took 3 months to process, and their conclusion was that the insurance company had followed the terms of my policy. I went back to the ambulance company. This time I filed a formal grievance. I submitted a written statement explaining exactly what had happened, that I had been conscious and coherent enough to provide clear instructions about which hospital to use, that I had shown them my insurance card, that they had disregarded my explicit requests. I never got a real response. Just a form letter saying they had investigated and found their paramedics had acted appropriately. The bills went to collections, all of them. My credit score, which had been pretty good for a 21-year-old, dropped by over 100 points. I started getting calls from collection agencies. They were relentless. Some were understanding when I explained the situation. Most didn't care. I set up payment plans for the ones that would work with me. $50 a month here, $75 a month there. I was drowning. Between school, work, and these payments, I was barely surviving. That's when I stumbled onto a Reddit thread in a personal finance community. Someone had posted about crushing medical debt, and the comments were full of advice I'd never heard before. People were talking about negotiating settlements, about how medical debt, especially once it hits collections, can often be settled for a fraction of the original amount, about how hospitals and collection agencies would rather get something than nothing, about how you could offer a lump sum cash payment for significantly less than what you owed. I read everything I could find, thread after thread of people who'd negotiated their bills down to 20 or 30% of the original amount. The key points were consistent. Wait until it's in collections. Save up whatever cash you can. Call them with a specific offer, explain that's all you have available, and be willing to walk away if they don't accept. I had been making those small monthly payments for about 8 months at that point. I'd paid maybe $2,000 total, but still owed over $4,000. I stopped making payments. It felt wrong, but I needed to save up cash for the settlement offers. Over the next 4 months, I scraped together every dollar I could, picked up extra shifts at the bookstore, sold my gaming console and some textbooks, skipped meals, put everything into a separate savings account. I managed to save $1,200. Then I started calling. The hospital bill was with a collection agency called Medicollect. I called and asked to speak to someone about settling the account. The representative transferred me to a supervisor. I explained my situation. I was a college student, I had no assets, my income was minimal, and I had $1,200 in cash that I could pay immediately to settle the entire debt. The supervisor said that wouldn't be enough. The account balance was $4,300. I stayed calm and repeated what I'd learned from Reddit. I said $1,200 was literally all I had access to. I could pay it today as a full settlement, or I could continue making sporadic small payments that might stop at any time if I had other financial emergencies. Their choice. She put me on hold. 10 minutes later, she came back and said they could accept $1,400. I counted at $1,200. She said $1,300 was the lowest she could go. I agreed. She emailed me a settlement agreement. I read every word multiple times. It stated that upon receipt of $1,300, the debt would be considered paid in full, the account would be closed, and they would report it as settled to the credit bureaus. I paid with a cashier's check the next day and kept copies of everything. The ambulance bill was $750 with a different collection agency. I called them with the same approach, offered $300 cash to settle. They accepted almost immediately. Didn't even try to negotiate higher. The physician bill was the hardest, $1,200, and they were more aggressive. I offered $400. They said no. I waited 2 weeks and called back. Offered $450. They said they could do $600. I said I'd already settled my other medical debts, and $450 was all I had left. They accepted. Total paid, $2,050. Total original debt, $6,250. I paid about 33% of what they'd originally demanded. The process took about 6 months from when I first read that Reddit thread to when I made my final settlement payment. It wasn't easy. The stress of deliberately defaulting on the payment plans was terrible. The collection calls got more frequent before I settled, but it worked. My credit score took a hit from the settlements, but it was already damaged from the collections, and within a year, it started recovering. By the time I graduated, it was back to where it had been before the whole mess started. The worst part? I found out later, through a friend who worked in hospital administration, that Street Michaels had an agreement with the city's ambulance service. They got a percentage of patients delivered by ambulance, which meant the paramedics were financially incentivized to bring people there. Nobody told me that. Nobody disclosed that conflict of interest. They just decided my bank account was less important than their revenue stream. But I'd learned something valuable. The medical billing system is designed to extract maximum money from people who don't know they have options. Those $6,000 bills weren't real prices. They were starting points for negotiation, and once debt goes to collections, those agencies bought it for pennies on the dollar, so any settlement above their purchase price is profit for them. I tell this story to everyone I know now, especially college students. Know your insurance. Know which hospitals are in network. And if you end up with medical debt you can't pay, don't just accept payment plans that'll take years. Research your options. Read those Reddit threads. Learn how to negotiate. The system is designed to take advantage of people who don't know better, but you don't have to let it. That's the end of that story. Trust between patients and emergency services matters, And when money corrupts that relationship, real people suffer real consequences. This next one is about the time I discovered that the legal system's checks and balances aren't worth much when the people running it are all friends. I own a small construction business. Well, I owned one. This happened 4 years ago, and it nearly destroyed everything I'd built. We did residential renovations, mostly kitchen and bathroom remodels, some basement finishing work, good quality stuff. We had steady clients, good reviews, a solid reputation in our community. I took on a big project in the spring of that year, a whole house renovation for a couple, the Hendersons, who had bought an old Victorian and wanted to modernize it while preserving the character. The contract was for $85,000, which was the biggest single job we'd ever landed. We agreed on milestones, payment schedules, everything in writing. The job started fine. We gutted the kitchen, started on the electrical work, refinished the hardwood floors in the living room and dining room. Then, about 6 weeks in, the problem started. The Hendersons kept changing their minds about materials. They'd approved tile for the kitchen backsplash, then decided they wanted something else. They'd signed off on fixtures, then wanted different ones. Every change meant extra time, extra materials, extra money. I documented everything. Every change order, every email, every conversation. I'd been in business long enough to know you needed a paper trail. We adjusted the contract accordingly, had them sign the change orders. The revised contract total was $94,000. We finished the job in October. It looked incredible. They seemed happy, they did a final walkthrough, had a few tiny punch list items, which we fixed within a week. Then came time for the final payment. They owed us $22,000 to close out the contract. They refused to pay, said the work was substandard, said we'd gone over budget without authorization, said we'd damaged original features of the house. None of it was true. We had photos from every stage of the project. We had signed change orders. We had their emails approving everything. I tried to work it out with them directly. They stopped returning my calls. I sent a formal demand letter through my attorney. They responded through their attorney saying they were counterclaiming for defective work and wanted $20,000 from me for repairs. It went to arbitration. That was in the contract, an arbitration clause. We couldn't go to regular court. We had to use binding arbitration through the American Arbitration Association. They assigned us an arbitrator, a guy named Richard Feldman. He was a retired attorney who'd done a lot of construction law. Seemed like a reasonable choice. The arbitration hearing was scheduled for February. I spent weeks preparing, gathered every document, every photo, every piece of evidence. My attorney and I built what we thought was an airtight case. We had signed change orders, we had email approvals, we had time-stamped photos showing the quality of our work. We had inspection reports from the city showing everything passed code. The hearing took 2 days. We presented our case. The Hendersons' attorney presented theirs, which was mostly them claiming that I'd pressured them into signing change orders, that the work quality wasn't what they'd expected, that we'd taken shortcuts. They had no real evidence, just their testimony. Feldman asked questions. He seemed engaged. He took notes. At the end of the second day, he said he'd issue his decision within 30 days. The decision came 28 days later. He ruled against me on almost every point, found that while the change orders were signed, they'd been signed under duress, found that the photographic evidence didn't conclusively prove quality workmanship, found that I owed the Hendersons $15,000 for defects and overcharges. I was stunned. My attorney was stunned. The decision made no legal sense, but it was binding arbitration. We had almost no grounds to appeal, except I couldn't let it go. $15,000 would have bankrupted my business. I'd already been out the $22,000 they owed me. I'd spent $8,000 on attorney fees. Now, I was supposed to pay them $15,000 on top of that? I started digging. I looked into Feldman's background, public records, professional history, anything I could find. It took me about a week to find it. Richard Feldman had been in a law partnership 20 years earlier, 3 partners in the firm. One of them was named Gerald Henderson, the same last name as my clients. I dug deeper. Gerald Henderson was the father of David Henderson, the husband in the couple I'd done the renovation for. Feldman had been in business with my client's father. They'd dissolved the partnership, supposedly on good terms, but they'd been professional partners, and Feldman hadn't disclosed this. The arbitration rules required arbitrators to disclose any potential conflicts of interest. This was a textbook conflict. I brought it to my attorney. He was immediately interested. This was grounds to vacate the arbitration award. We filed a motion in court to vacate based on evident partiality. We had to prove that Feldman had a conflict and that it affected his decision. We submitted the partnership records. We submitted the timeline showing they'd been partners. We argued that this relationship was material and should have been disclosed. The Hendersons' attorney argued that it was ancient history, that the partnership had ended decades ago, that there was no evidence of ongoing contact or relationship. The judge took 4 months to rule. 4 months of my business hemorrhaging money, of me taking out a loan to cover expenses, of lying awake at night wondering if I was going to lose everything. The judge ruled in my favor, found that Feldman should have disclosed the partnership, found that the failure to disclose constituted evident partiality, vacated the arbitration award, ordered a new arbitration with a different arbitrator. But here's the thing, we couldn't get the same arbitrator assignment process. The AAA had rules about re-arbitration. We had to mutually agree on a new arbitrator or go through a selection process that could take months. The Morgan's attorney dragged it out. 6 months, 9 months, a year. Eventually, we got a new hearing scheduled. New arbitrator, a woman named Sarah Mitchell, who had no connections to anyone involved. We presented the same case. This time, the decision was completely different. She found that the change orders were valid, that the Hendersons owed me the final payment, and that their counterclaims were baseless. She awarded me $18,000 of the $22,000 they owed, accounting for a few minor issues that had been legitimate. But by then, it had been 2 years since I finished the job. 2 years of legal fees, which totaled over $30,000. 2 years of stress. 2 years of my reputation taking hits because the Hendersons had told everyone in town that I'd done shoddy work. I got the money, but I'd lost more than double that in costs, and lost business. I filed a complaint against Feldman with the AAA. They investigated. Their conclusion was that he should have disclosed the partnership, but that it was an oversight rather than intentional bias. He got a written reprimand. That's it. A written reprimand for a conflict of interest that cost me years of my life and nearly my business. I learned something from all this. The legal system talks about impartiality, about fairness, about due process. But when the people running it have their own networks, their own relationships, their own history, sometimes those principles don't mean much. You have to look deeper. You have to ask questions. You have to verify that the person judging you doesn't have a reason to rule against you. That's the end of that story. Sometimes the system designed to protect you is the thing you need protection from. Our next story involves someone I thought was one of my closest friends, and how that friendship cost me thousands of dollars before I figured out what was really happening. Her name was Vanessa. We met in grad school, both getting our MBAs, both ambitious and driven, and constantly stressed about money. We bonded over late-night study sessions, over complaining about professors, over the shared experience of being broke graduate students trying to build better lives. After graduation, we stayed close, even though we ended up in different cities. She was in Chicago, I was in Milwaukee, close enough to visit, far enough that we mostly kept in touch through phone calls and video chats. About a year after we graduated, Vanessa called me upset. She'd had a car accident, nothing major, nobody was hurt, but her car needed repairs and her insurance deductible was $1,000. She was between paychecks, her checking account was almost empty, and she didn't have family she could ask. She wondered if I could possibly lend her the money. She'd pay me back in 2 weeks when she got paid. I said yes immediately. We were friends. She'd helped me through tough times. $1,000 was a lot for me, but I had it in my savings, and she'd pay me back in 2 weeks. I sent her a Venmo transfer that night. 2 weeks later, she paid me back. She was embarrassed, apologetic, grateful, said it would never happen again. I told her not to worry about it. That's what friends do. 3 months later, she called again. Her landlord was demanding rent early because of some issue with the building's management company changing. She needed $1,500 for 5 days until her paycheck cleared. Could I help? She promised she'd pay me back immediately. I hesitated this time. $1,500 was more than I was comfortable lending. But she'd paid me back before. She was my friend. I sent the money. She paid me back 6 days later, just like she said she would. Over the next year, it happened 4 more times. Always an emergency, always a temporary cash flow problem. Her credit card payment was due, and she was traveling for work and couldn't access her bank. Her rent check bounced due to a banking error, and she needed to cover it immediately. Her brother had a medical emergency, and she'd covered his expenses, but now she was short. Always between $800 and $2,000, always paid back within a week or 2. I started to feel like a bank, but she always paid me back, and she was always so grateful, so apologetic. It felt like I was helping a friend through genuinely difficult times. Then one day, about 14 months into this pattern, we had a video call, just a regular catch-up call, nothing special. She was in her apartment, and I could see her living room in the background. We were talking about work, about a guy she'd started dating, normal friend stuff. Then I noticed something on the shelf behind her. A distinctive lamp, teal-blue ceramic base with a geometric pattern and a cream-coloured shade. I knew that lamp. I knew it because I'd almost bought it myself 2 months earlier. It was from Anthropology, and it cost $280. I remembered the price exactly because I'd put it in my online cart, then removed it because I couldn't justify spending that much on a lamp. I didn't say anything right then, but after the call, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The lamp had been released 6 weeks earlier. I knew because I'd signed up for Anthropology's email list and had seen the announcement, which meant Vanessa had bought it recently. 6 weeks earlier, she'd called me in a panic. Said her checking account had been compromised. The bank had frozen it while they investigated fraudulent charges, and she needed $1,800 to cover her bills until it was sorted out. I'd sent the money. She'd paid me back 10 days later. I started wondering. I opened my Amazon account and looked at my order history. Then I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I logged into the Amazon household account we'd set up years ago when we were roommates during grad school. We'd used it to share Prime benefits. I'd completely forgotten about it. Her order history was there. I could see everything she'd ordered. And there, during the periods when she'd borrowed money from me, were orders. Lots of them. During the time she supposedly had a frozen bank account, she'd ordered $300 worth of clothes from Amazon. During the time she supposedly needed money for her brother's medical emergency, she'd ordered a new coffee maker, throw pillows, and a set of knives, totaling $400. During the time her rent check supposedly bounced, she'd ordered makeup, a yoga mat, and workout clothes. I went back through my records. Every single time she'd borrowed money from me, she'd been shopping, not for emergencies, for things she wanted. I felt sick. The lamp was just visible enough in the background, just distinctive enough that I'd recognized it. If it hadn't been for that one detail, I might never have known. I didn't confront her immediately. I took a week to think about it. Part of me wanted to believe there was an explanation. Maybe she was using credit cards for the purchases and needed cash for different things. Maybe the timing was coincidental. But I knew better. The pattern was too clear. She'd been using me as her personal line of credit, so she could spend money on things she wanted without dipping into her checking account. When I finally confronted her, I did it over email. I told her what I'd discovered. I listed specific purchases and the dates they aligned with her emergencies. I told her that I felt used and lied to, and that our friendship was over. Her response was deflection. She said I'd violated her privacy by looking at her Amazon account. She said the purchases weren't what they seemed, that some were gifts for other people, that some were returns she'd forgotten to mention. She said I was overreacting. She never actually denied it. She paid me back the money she currently owed me, about $1,200 from the most recent emergency. Then she blocked me on everything. Social media, phone, email, everything. I did the math later. Over 14 months, I'd lent her a total of about $17,000. She'd always paid me back, so technically I hadn't lost money. But she'd been lying to me the entire time, using our friendship, using my trust, to finance her shopping habits. The worst part was feeling stupid. I'd believed her every single time. Every emergency had seemed legitimate. Every apology had seemed sincere. I'd prided myself on being a loyal friend, and she'd exploited that. I later found out, through mutual acquaintances, that she'd been doing the same thing to at least 2 other people. Small amounts, always paid back, always an emergency. She'd essentially created a system where she could spend whatever she wanted while keeping her bank account stable by borrowing from friends. That's the end of that story. Sometimes, the people who seem most grateful for your help are the ones taking advantage of it. This next story is different from the others because it's about something I did rather than something that was done to me, and it's about trying to help people avoid the darkness I went through. 3 years ago, I was in the worst place I'd ever been mentally. I was 27, working a job I hated, living alone in a basement apartment that barely got natural light, eating garbage, not exercising, and spending most of my free time either sleeping or staring at screens. I wasn't clinically depressed. At least, I never got officially diagnosed, but I was definitely in a dark place. Everything felt heavy. Getting out of bed was hard. Interacting with people exhausted me. I had no energy, no motivation, no joy in anything. It went on for about 8 months. My friends noticed but didn't really know what to say. My family was worried but lived far away. I wasn't suicidal or anything that acute. I was just existing rather than living. What changed was almost stupid in how simple it was. One morning, I woke up at 6:30 am because of construction noise outside my apartment. Normally, I would have put in earplugs and gone back to sleep, but for some reason I just got up. I made coffee, and instead of drinking it while scrolling through my phone, I took it outside. It was early September. The sun was just coming up. The air was cool but not cold. I sat on the steps outside my building and drank my coffee and watched the sky lighten. And, for the first time in months, I felt something other than numbness. Not happiness exactly, just presence, like I was actually experiencing a moment instead of just enduring time passing. I did it again the next morning, and the next. Within a week, I was walking around the block while drinking my coffee. Within 2 weeks, I was walking for 20 minutes before work. The morning light did something to my brain. I started sleeping better. I started having more energy during the day. Then I started thinking about what I was eating. I'd been living on frozen meals, fast food, whatever was easiest. I started buying actual groceries. Started cooking simple meals. Chicken and vegetables, rice and beans. Nothing fancy, but real food. That helped too. After about 6 weeks of morning walks and better eating, I joined a gym. I'd never been a gym person. The whole culture intimidated me. But I found a small place near my apartment that was never crowded in the mornings. I started with just cardio, 30 minutes on the elliptical. Eventually I added weights, following programs I found online. It took about 4 months before I realized I felt fundamentally different. The heavy feeling was gone. I had energy. I was sleeping well. I was actually looking forward to things instead of just dreading them. It wasn't like a switch flipped. It was gradual. But it was real. What I didn't expect was how it affected my friendships. I had a group of guys I'd known since college. We'd stayed in touch, but mostly through group chats and occasional hangouts where we'd drink grown-up beverages and play video games. good guys, but none of us were exactly thriving. One of them, Derek, mentioned that he'd been feeling off lately. Tired all the time, stressed, unmotivated. I told him about what I'd been doing. The morning walks, the better food, the gym. He kind of brushed it off at first, said he didn't have time for all that. But a few weeks later, he texted me, asking if he could join me for a morning walk. I said sure. We met at 6:45 a.m. at a park near both our places, walked for about half an hour, just talking. It became a regular thing. 3 mornings a week, then 4. Derek started feeling better, started eating better, eventually joined the same gym, and he started talking about it to our other friends. 2 more guys, Tyler and James, asked if they could join the morning walks. Then it was 4 of us, meeting 4 or 5 mornings a week, walking for 30 to 45 minutes before work. We created a group chat just for accountability. Someone would post that they were going to the gym after work, and others would say they'd meet them there. We started sharing meals we'd cooked, recipes we'd tried. It wasn't preachy or intense, it was just mutual support. The thing I realized was how hard it had been to do this alone. When I was in that dark place, every positive change felt like climbing a mountain. But with other people doing it alongside me, it felt manageable, natural, even easy sometimes. Tyler had been dealing with anxiety for years. He'd been on medication, which helped, but he still had rough days. He said the morning walks helped more than anything else he'd tried. Having a reason to get up, to get outside, to move, having people expecting him to show up. James had gained about 40 pounds over 2 years working a desk job with long hours. He said he'd tried to get back in shape multiple times but always gave up after a few weeks. Having the group made him stick with it. He lost 35 pounds over about 8 months. Derek told me once that the morning walks might have saved his life. He'd been having really dark thoughts before we started. Nothing he'd acted on, but they were there. Getting up early, moving his body, being around people who cared about him, it pulled him out of that spiral. I don't want to oversell this. Exercise and morning sunlight and healthy eating aren't magic cures for serious mental health issues. If someone needs therapy or medication or professional help, they should get it. But for me and my friends, these simple changes made a real difference. We're still doing it 3 years later. The group has grown. A couple of my co-workers joined. One of them brought his brother. We have probably 10 guys now who do the morning walks at least a few times a week. Some come to the gym, some don't. It's not prescriptive. It's just a community of people who decided that feeling terrible all the time wasn't inevitable. I think what I learned is that the path out of darkness is easier when you're not walking it alone. When I was struggling, I felt isolated. I felt like I was the only one who couldn't get their life together. But talking to my friends, I realized they were all dealing with similar things. None of us had it figured out, but we could help each other try. That's the end of that story. Sometimes, the best thing you can do for yourself is help someone else do the same thing. Our next one is about finally breaking free from a corporation that had been holding me hostage through terrible service and predatory contracts. I live in rural Montana. Not like suburbs, near a small city rural. Actually rural. The nearest town with more than 500 people is 30 miles away. When I moved here 5 years ago, I knew internet access would be limited. What I didn't know was that it would become one of the most frustrating parts of my entire life. My only option was satellite internet through a company called SkySat. They had a monopoly in areas like mine. No cable infrastructure, no fibre, no cell towers close enough for reliable mobile hotspot. Just SkySat. The service was terrible from day one. Advertised speeds were 25 megabits per second. Actual speeds rarely exceeded 5. During bad weather, which was frequent, it would drop to less than 1 or cut out entirely. Video calls were impossible. Streaming anything required buffering every few minutes. Downloading a large file could take hours. Uploading anything bigger than a few megabytes was an exercise in frustration. But the worst part was the data cap. They limited you to 50 gigabytes per month at full speed. After that, you got throttled to speeds that made dial-up look fast. 50 gigabytes might sound like a lot, but when you work from home like I do, it's nothing. A few video calls, some cloud backups, normal web browsing, and you'd hit the cap in 2 weeks. I called customer service dozens of times over the years. Every conversation was the same. They'd apologize, say they understood my frustration, explain that satellite technology had limitations, and offer to upgrade me to a more expensive plan with slightly higher data caps. The next tier was $120 per month for 75 gigabytes. I was already paying $95 for 50 gigabytes. The value proposition was insulting. I dealt with it because I had no choice. I adjusted my work schedule to do data-intensive tasks during their bonus hours between 2 a.m. and 8 a.m. when data usage didn't count against the cap. I set alarms to wake up at 3 a.m. to upload files or download software updates. It was absurd. Then, about 6 months ago, I heard about Starlink, specifically Starlink Mini. It was a newer, smaller version of their satellite system designed for mobility. Better speeds, no hard data caps, and it cost $65 per month, $65 compared to my $95 for SkySat. And it was actually portable, meaning I could take it camping or travelling. I ordered one immediately. It arrived 3 weeks later. Setting it up took maybe 15 minutes. Point it at the sky, plug it in, connect to the Wi-Fi. I ran a speed test. 93 megabits per second download, 22 megabits per second upload. I almost cried. I used both systems for a week, just to make sure Starlink was reliable. It was. Weather didn't affect it the way it had with SkySat. Speed stayed consistent. Video calls were smooth. I could stream without buffering, upload files without waiting hours. It was transformative. So I called SkySat to cancel. That's when the nightmare started. The representative told me I was under contract. I'd signed a 2-year agreement when I initially signed up, and I still had 7 months remaining. If I cancelled early, there would be a termination fee. $420. I told them their service was terrible and that I'd found a better option. They offered to reduce my monthly bill by $10 if I stayed. $10 for service that barely worked. I declined and said I still wanted to cancel. They transferred me to their retention department. Another representative, same script, apologized for my experience, offered a slightly better discount, explained the termination fee. I said I understood and wanted to proceed with cancellation. They transferred me again, this time to a supervisor. He spent 20 minutes trying to convince me to stay. Offered me 3 months of free service if I extended my contract by another year. I explained that I didn't want to extend a contract for service that didn't meet my needs. He said the termination fee was contractually obligated and there was nothing he could do to waive it. I asked for a copy of my contract. They said they'd email it to me. I never received it. I called back 2 days later. Different representative. She said the contract should have been emailed and that she'd send it again. Never received that one either. I went through my files and found the original contract I'd signed 5 years ago. Read through it carefully. It was a 2-year contract, but that 2-year period had ended 3 years ago. I'd been month to month since then. There was nothing in the contract about automatic renewal or extension. I called back, told them I'd reviewed my contract and that the 2-year term had expired. The representative put me on hold for 15 minutes, then came back and said I'd agreed to a new 2-year term when they upgraded their service 18 months ago. I asked what upgrade they were referring to. She couldn't provide specifics, said it was in their system. I never agreed to any upgrade. My service had been exactly the same for 5 years. Same equipment, same speeds, same terrible data caps. I told her this. She insisted their records showed a contract extension. I asked to speak to another supervisor, got transferred. This supervisor said the same thing, but offered to reduce the termination fee to $250 as a courtesy. I said I shouldn't owe any termination fee because I never agreed to a new contract. She said if I wanted to dispute it, I could file a complaint with their legal department. I hung up and filed a complaint with the Federal Communications Commission. Detailed everything: the poor service, the inability to get my contract, the claims about a contract extension I never agreed to, the termination fee. Then I filed a complaint with the Montana Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. Same information. Then I disputed the charge with my credit card company. I'd already paid for my final month of service, but when SkySat tried to charge me the termination fee, my credit card company blocked it pending investigation. It took 3 months to resolve. The FCC opened an investigation. SkySat had to respond. They sent me a copy of a contract they claimed I'd signed electronically. The signature didn't match mine. The date was for a day when I'd been out of the country on vacation. I had passport stamps proving I wasn't in the United States that day. The FCC ruled in my favour. SkySat had to cancel the termination fee and provide me with a refund for 2 months of service I'd paid for but barely used due to outages. Total refund was $212. My credit card company also ruled in my favour on the disputed charge. I've been using Starlink Mini for 6 months now. It's been incredible. Reliable speeds, no data caps, and I'm saving $30 per month compared to what I was paying SkySat. That's $360 per year, which over time adds up significantly. But the real game changer has been the portability. I took it camping last month, set it up at my campsite, had full internet access in the middle of nowhere. It was surreal, but also incredibly practical. I could still handle work emails, take calls, and not be completely disconnected. I also took it on a road trip to visit family. Every hotel I stayed at had terrible Wi-Fi. Slow, unreliable, constantly dropping connection. I just used Starlink instead. Set it up in my hotel room. Had perfect internet the entire trip. The freedom of not being held hostage by a single provider that knew they had a monopoly has been worth more than the money I'm saving. SkySat treated customers terribly because they could. Because what were we going to do go without internet? They banked on that desperation. I tell everyone in rural areas about Starlink now. I know it's not available everywhere yet, and it's not perfect for everyone's situation. But if you're stuck with satellite internet from legacy providers who treat you like garbage, there are better options now. You don't have to accept being exploited just because you live somewhere remote. That's the end of that story. Sometimes the best revenge is simply walking away and watching a bad company lose the power they held over you. That's it for today. Please hit subscribe if you enjoyed this, and let me know below what your favourite story was. Thank you, and I'll see you tomorrow.